On this program, we have spoken a ton about the heroin epidemic plaguing all parts of our region, let alone our country. Now, a few short years ago, headlines like this, they'd be shocking. But now, they're commonplace. Heroin epidemic plaguing suburbs, facing the Hudson Valley's heroin problem, heroin on the rise throughout the Hudson Valley, and obviously this not just relegated to that portion of our region. Now there's a bill in the state that would require chain drugstores to carry overdose prevention kits. It is a sign, frankly, of the times. Not a good sign, but nonetheless here, at least a proactive solution. Democratic New York State Senator David Carlucci introduced the bill in the Senate. He's a friend of the program. And also Shelley Mayer, another good friend of the program, introduced an accompanying bill in the State Assembly. And David is kind enough to join us now. Who would have thought it would have come to the point where we're just trying to deal with the reality to get this into stores, but that's where we are, right?
Right. Well, it's something, I think it's low-hanging fruit. This is not going to solve the heroin problem, but it's one step in the solution. Unfortunately, we have an instance right now where our young people are more likely to be killed in an or more likely to be killed by a drug overdose than in an automobile accident. I mean, that's a crisis. The alarm bell should be ringing. And I've been trying to work with the Commissioner of Health in New York State for almost a year now, because we don't need legislation to allow this to be accessible over the counter.
And just to clarify for our audience, because when certainly a generation that are watching this is heroin, you're talking about some back alley junkie. I have spoken to law enforcement, doesn't matter what part of the state, they're telling me it's in the suburbs, in leafy, well-to-do communities. It's still in the city. You go to rural communities and the meth labs that might have been there, now heroin. I saw on the election during the campaign trail that opioid abuse in New Hampshire is higher than on a percentage basis New York, for example. It's throughout this country. It's cheaper than it used to be. It's not, forget it, the last step along the line. For some kids, they go straight from marijuana to it. It's endemic. And this just attempts to deal with the reality of it, not the way we want it to be, but the way it is, right?
Well, we've seen a proliferation in opiate products being available, right? I heard a statistic just recently where the United States, we make up something like 4% of the world's population, yet we consume over 80% of the world's opiates. And what's happened is these pharmaceutical companies have developed painkillers like oxycodone. They've been proliferating at an exponential rate in terms of being prescribed. I think unknowingly, people take these, they become addicted. They then turn to products like heroin because it's much cheaper than oxycodone and other types of opiate products. And so what's happening, they're getting hooked. And the reason why heroin is so deadly is what happens is, what naloxone, this product does, is it's an opiate antagonist. So the opiates basically sit on the receptors in your brain, and it basically shuts off the communication between the brain and the rest of the body. And what happens is you stop breathing. That's why it's so deadly. That's why we see these record numbers of deaths. Right here in the Hudson Valley, we've lost over 230 people just between Rockland and Westchester in the past few years to heroin, another 170 to opiate pills. So it's crazy. And so
what we saw, just to transition to this, we've had cops in this program who've agitated to get Narcan to actually be able to deal with the immediate overdoses in front of them to try and revive people, and many times successfully, from those major overdoses. You want to take this, instead of just leaving it solely in the hands of the EMTs or for the cops, and put it in effect in the hands of the parents.
Right, exactly. I've been doing trainings. I've trained over 250 people, just civilians, in how to use naloxone. It's very easy. And what they do is basically, it's a nasal injector. It's a nasal spray. So you spray it into someone's nose, so simple, and it revives them in a matter of seconds. Every time I do one of these trainings, a few weeks later, a month later, I hear stories of people actually using their naloxone kit and saving someone's life. We've documented in New York State close to 2,000 saves of people being saved with naloxone. That's been documented.
We got a couple minutes. You want to show what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's very simple. And this is why I say that you should just have it available over the counter. All you would do is you would take it out. You'd first assess if someone was unconscious or if they were just sleeping. You basically just pop the cap. Pop it off here, pop it off there. This is the atomizer. You would take the naloxone, just put it right into the atomizer. It screws right in. This is in the nasal passage, and you would, just screw it in there. And just spray it.
Yep, I get it. So, and this will instantly revive people?
It will, in a matter of seconds. Then immediately you would call 911. And
how do you respond to that?
By the way, in that, Richard, go ahead. Yeah.
The criticisms that this sort of gives people a safety margin that may make them more likely to experiment with heroin.
Well, I just don't buy it, because as we know, heroin is not a recreational drug. This is something where people have a severe addiction to. And so I don't believe that this is something that people are going to say, hey, I'm going to go out and use heroin because now I have this naloxone. People are already addicted. What this does is just give them another chance at life. And that's what we need to do.
How do you spread the word on this? Because you're not really, this isn't really for addicts. This is for the people who live with the addicts or love the addicts. And so you're looking at parents or loved ones who might be sheepish about going into a pharmacy and saying, hey, I need some of that overdose stuff?
Well, that's the issue. That's why I think it needs to be accessible over the counter, because then they can go in, they don't have to say who they are and tell their story. Right now, if you wanted to access this, you'd have to get a prescription to do it. So you have to go through that process. And like you said, it's usually not for the person addicted themselves, it's for that loved one. So it's harder for them to necessarily get a prescription, because you say, it's not for me, it's for my loved one. So let's just make it easy, accessible.
But Senator, in a panic situation where someone is having an overdose due to heroin, how does the family member, I mean, I'm sure you'll know of their past drug use, but how do you know that that's actually what's going on when this person is unconscious?
Well, you don't necessarily know, I mean, unless you have a good reason to think that they were using an opiate product. The good news about naloxone is that there's no side effects. It's something that you use, it's not going to cause any damage.
So booze that knocks somebody out or something, it's not going to...
That's right, it's not going to make an impact on it.
I love the idea. I'm familiar with the product. It's an incredibly life-saving product. My only question to you is, why require it in the drugstores? Why don't just let the... I agree, no prescription is great if there's no harm to it, but why require it?
So my legislation, what it does is we require it in the big box stores if you had over 20 pharmacies of the same, and then it would be of if they wanted to, at the independent pharmacies. I believe that the independent pharmacies are real community leaders. They're involved in the community, and they'll choose to do this. They'll choose to carry it. Right now, even if they wanted to do it over the counter, they're not able to do that. So I think if you allow the independent pharmacies to do it, they'll do it, and I require the big box chains to do it.
What are you hearing from your colleagues in Albany? Any resistance to this? Do you think it's likely to pass? What do you think its fate is going to be?
I'm hopeful that we can build awareness about it and get the Department of Health to fully implement it. What I'm asking for is just like the flu shot. That's something that you would need a prescription for if you didn't have a standing order by the Commissioner of Health. The Commissioner of Health has issued a standing order to allow people to get flu shots. That's why we can go into almost any pharmacy and get a flu shot today. We need to do the same thing with naloxone. It shouldn't have to come down to legislation. This is where the Health Department needs to step up and have regulations that will help people.
I will be speaking with Assemblywoman Shelley Mayer tomorrow. This subject, I'm sure, will come up as well. I wish the best of luck with it, and I just want people to think about for a second. We've reached the point here where this is an important but a necessary tool to be able to arm parents to deal with their kids overdosing. And when cops agitate to get it as well, you know we have what can only be described as an epidemic on our hands. Senator, thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, when we come back, everyone, I'll be speaking to an infectious disease expert to talk about the Zika virus. It's spread to dozens of countries in Latin America, but the question is, how really concerned should the American public be? We'll talk about that and more after this.